Today we're going to be looking at building our door. Our door is a 5-piece door. We've got 2 rails and 2 stiles as well as a panel in the center of it. And I'll ask that you refer to our nightstand plan to get all the specific sizes and directions for building our door. We've got 2 places you can find the information. One of them is right here in our nightstand door page. On here is really 6 steps. They're the big steps in making the door. And on the other page, the next one in the packet, we have the more detailed door instructions. So the detailed door instructions, there are 14 steps that if you're a person that really likes that step-by-step direction, this is going to be the place that you're going to go. For the sake of this video and not going through all these little steps, I'm just going to hit the 6 big ones. And if you've got questions, let's answer those individually. But the number 1 step on both directions, it says start with a piece of solid wood that is 2 3/8 of an inch wide by at least 6 foot long. 8 foot is even better. We want to start with the big long piece of wood. That is going to make the frame of our door. This is what the panel is going to ride into, and we have to do a special cut on a machine that we'll show you next called the shaper. And we can't run short pieces of wood through the shaper. So our very first cut is to take a long piece of wood like this and run it through the table saw. Now, when we're running a long piece of wood through the table saw, there's a few things that we need to keep in mind. So I've got the table saw set at 2 3/8. Now to cut a long piece of wood, I've just grabbed a long piece of wood from the lumber rack in the back. We always want to hold on to the end of the board. I see a lot of people when we're trying to cut short or long pieces, holding it in the middle and feeding it back. But you'll see here in just a minute, I like to hold the very end of the board and push that through. Always make sure that push stick is within reach. You can see on these longer pieces, they want to tip down. So it's nice to have a person able to help you catch that board. I'm going to take the scrap, the leftover piece, put it back on the rack, and we're going to take the piece that we just cut over to the shaper. Now that we've got our board cut on the table saw, we need to bring it over here to this shaper. This is called the stick cutting shaper, and it's going to cut a groove in the edge of our board that will accept the panel when we put our door together. Couple things to remember on this, and it's written right here, and it's hard to see from the video, but on the side of the table it says good side down, 24-inch minimum piece. We can't run short boards through here. When you run short boards through, they either get stuck, but this machine also snipes the first and last 3 or 4 inches of our board, and so with that snipe, we can't use short pieces because they'll be too short. So if you cut all your pieces to size first and you run them through here, you have to cut off the first and last few inches, they'll all be too short. So you'll see what I mean after this gets run through. But to run it through here, we're going to lay the board flat and push it up against to the fence and make sure the side that I want to be the best side, or the front of my door, should be facing down. I should be looking at the ugly side. I'm going to turn the dust collector on for this because this machine makes a big mess without the dust collector being on. This should take it on its own, but you may have to give it a little bit of encouragement if it does get stuck. You can see it wants to go on its own, but I need to pull it just a little bit and we'll get it through. You can see, hopefully you can see this on camera, but the very end of the board and the very start of the board sniped a little bit. So I want to make sure that I cut this chunk off on the miter saw when I'm cutting it to the finished size. So I'm now on step 3. I cut the board down to 2 3/8 of an inch on the table saw, and I ran the board through the shaper. Now step 3 says cut the board to the sizes listed below. I need 2 at 2 1/4 by 8 1/4 and 2 at 2 1/4 by 18. Notice, and you may have noticed this, when you were running it through the shaper, we cut our board at 2 3/8, but that shaper takes 1/8 of an inch off. So our board now is at 2 1/4 wide. There's no need to run it through the time saver or the planer to get it down to 2 1/4. So I gotta remember to take off that first little bit because it's got the snipe. So my first step is gonna be to cut that snipe or that extra cut out of my board. got 2 at 18. And 2 at 8 1/4. Now I've got a bad spot that I'm going to cut out here, so you'll actually see me make 3 cuts. Try not to drop your boards, but you'll see you've got enough extra here that if you make mistakes, you're able to cut more. And if you're making your door towards the end of the term, if you look over here, you'll probably find several of these left over from people who didn't make any mistakes, and maybe it'll be a little bit easier path to get your door done a little bit quicker. Our next step is to go up to the other shaper to cut the rail end called the cope cut on our doors. So we're zoomed in here a little bit, and this is one of these steps that's not listed on this page, but it is on the detailed directions, and it's really important to do. We're going to take our short 2 rails, and we are going to put the end on here. Now this end that goes on here will be the exact opposite of the other shaper. You can see right now that that's not going to make a very nice joint, but when we're all done, we're going to have a joint that slides together very nicely like that. So to do that, we're going to use this machine. And there's a couple steps on this machine that can be a little bit confusing. The biggest mistake people make is they flip the door over the wrong way. So our rails, we need to have this round edge always facing down. If it's not facing down, we're going to have to start over, but that's where that extra piece of wood comes in. So it's nice to have that. So always, always, always this side facing down. And I'm going to start with the square edge of my rail up against the square edge on the fence. So my clear plastic pieces go, this clear plastic piece on the guide or the sled goes up tight to the fence here. My board goes up tight to the fence, and I'm going to tighten this piece in, and then I'm going to click and lock this down. Now, if this doesn't click and lock down, your piece will get sucked out, and it will look like this. So you can even give it a wiggle test to make sure, but that's a big mistake people make, is this doesn't have that actual click. They just let it sit on top of here, and it's going to suck the board all the way into the machine. So now I turn it on. Nice and slow, and if you don't like the cut that you made, do it again. Now I'm going to rotate this so the round edge, it's still down, but is up against the square here. Now when I do that, I want to use this save stick that's right here, and I'll show you why here, and hopefully this shows up on the video. But if I just have this round edge up against the square, it tends to tear this cut out. But when I put the save stick in, it's a backup block, so that does not tear out. So it's critically important that you use this when you rotate it. So my first cut was like this. I rotate it 180 degrees, put the save stick in, and then I do the exact same process over. Push everything tight up to the fence, lock it in with this bar, and then make sure this thing clicks and locks down. And I always like to test my piece so we can see now that I've got a really nice joint. I just need to repeat that step for the other side. Square edge against square edge. I don't need the save stick. Everything is locked down. I rotate it. I put the save stick in. It's perfectly flush with the end. And there I'm done with my 2 rails. I like to leave the save stick sitting up here by the dust collector. Now we need to cut out our panel and assemble our door. Our door panel is made out of this 1/4 inch material. You can find usually scraps of it over here. If we have to, we can cut it out of a big sheet behind the panel saw. But chances are you'll be able to find a piece here. Now grain direction is really important. The panel of the door has the grain go up and down. So it's important that we cut it 8 inches wide and 14 inches long. So the 14 inches is the cross cut, the 8 inches is the rip. And I'm going to take this over to the table saw to make those cuts. I'm going to make my first cut at 14 inches. That's the cross cut. So I set my stop at 14 inches for my door panel. That's my 14-inch cut for my length, and my 8-inch cut is for the width. These scraps aren't big enough to cut another door panel, although this is close. Please throw them away. Don't let your scraps stack up over here. Before we assemble our door, I would suggest using the DA or the random orbit sander to sand your panel. It's going to be difficult to do after your door is assembled. But I always suggest dry fitting your door together. That way we can catch any mistakes that are made before the glue is drying and we have a problem. And you're going to notice that when this is dry fit together, you will have a little bit of slop in the panel. It's designed intentionally to be that way. We want the panel to be a little bit big, a little bit small. I got some fuzzies there that I should sand off, but I'm not going to for the video. We have the panel intentionally be a little bit small so that if it decides to shrink or expand, we're not going to break our door apart. I'm building this in the winter right now, so everything's as little as it's going to be. But in the summer, we don't want that panel to expand. So what I'm looking for is I want my stiles and rails to be flush on the ends, and then I'll glue it together. So I can see I don't have any gaps or cracks there. Everything looks like it fits fine. I know I can do that, and there'll be a little bit of a gap there. Don't do that. Leave this up when we put our door together. So now let's glue this together. When I do the gluing, I'm only going to glue these parts right here. I'm not going to glue the whole door together, I'm not going to put any glue in the long joints, just the ends. This allows the panel to move if it needs to expand or contract. Don't get carried away with the glue. You don't want to have a bunch of excess glue on your door panel. So I'm being careful when I put this together to have the ends line up nicely, because it's kind of hard to fix, especially once that glue sets up. I set my doors here. If I need to, I can grab a hammer. To tap these ends in. So I'm here, tap that flush, clamp that. Same thing up here. I put a little pressure on it. Then I use a hammer, tap that and that flush. Now let that sit for about 15 minutes. If you do get any excess glue in here, wipe it out now with a damp paper towel. And if you hit this in too far, get a scrap of wood to tap it back with.